Boundless Authenticity Podcast.
What if everything you've been told about healing, consciousness, and reality is only half the story? Boundless Authenticity is more than a podcast. It's a raw, unfiltered journey into the hidden truths that the mainstream avoids. Each episode unlocks powerful insights from radical thinkers, spiritual pioneers, and fearless healers who challenge the status quo and awaken what's been dormant within you. If you've ever felt like there's more beneath the surface, there is, and this is where you'll find it. Thanks for joining me on this episode of Boundless Authenticity. If you've made it this far, go ahead and follow the podcast from wherever you are streaming it and share it with your friends so that we can grow our Boundless Authenticity community and rise above the noise and inauthenticity of the internet. Today's guest is Dr. Nicole Dolan. Dr. Nicole Dolan is a psychologist, trauma specialist, and mother of three. She helps overwhelmed mothers turn chaos into calm and rediscover their true selves. As a creator of the Sacred Mother Blueprint, Dr. Dolan blends neuroscience, spiritual psychology, and real-life experience to guide moms from burnout to breakthrough. With 15 plus years in healing work, she brings heart, depth, and transformative tools to every conversation. Please visit drnicoledolan.com or sacredpathholistictherapy.com. How's it going?
It's going well. I feel like I really appreciate, listening to your intro live. I feel like really cheering that on. I mean, it awakens the sacred rebel in me, to hear that you really spend time talking with people who are trying to speak about deeper truths in the healing world and otherwise. So yeah, it's going good.
I appreciate that very much. Why'd you laugh? That made me laugh too.
I just was giggling. I was like, I could feel just the heightened energy. I was like, yeah, it's just awakening the rebel in me. I'm like, yeah, that's what we're going to do,
Yeah,
so
that's good. I think that this is a topic or set of topics, conversation, however you want to brand that this podcast is missing because there is a lot of noise, like I said, on the internet. Popular psychology has come along and through various social media outlets popularized a lot of ideas about what is trauma that in reality, unless you're a practicing psychologist or something, you really wouldn't know the ins and outs of it. And it has led to a growing victim mentality. A strong ideology has basically brewed and poured itself a cup, and everybody's drinking it and believing that a lot of things that happen in life, you will be stuck forever. You can't get over it. You have to take medication. You have to walk away from everybody that disagrees from you, all of these different things. But the world wasn't like that before the internet. We all just kind of beat each other up or cussed each other out or talked about it. And we got over our stuff and we moved on. In extreme cases, it didn't work out that way. However, and we do acknowledge that. But I feel like you are the person, since I have awakened your sacred rebel, to address the reality and, as you said, turn chaos into calm.
Yeah. So what's coming through for me right now is this idea about from fragmentation to wholeness, from fragmentation to integration. And I'll speak to that a little bit. So I think to your point, you're really speaking about how we live in a world that's very, very split right now. I mean, I don't have to be the one to show that or share that, but even in the mental health realm, we live in a very split way where we're really focusing on healing one thing, we're focusing on that one trauma, or we're focusing on the symptoms of depression or anxiety. And as a depth psychologist, we really focus on paying attention to what the symptoms of depression, of anxiety are actually coming with their own wisdom to share with us. Like, what is it that's going on, not just in ourselves, but in the world that's really not feeling right, and what is it bringing up in us as an invitation to heal? So when I'm pulling into those themes of fragmentation to integration, I'm thinking about how my work has shifted over the years, moving from working with a very specific incident, which is part of the work. I do want to say, like, I myself have experienced certain traumas that very individual issue needed to be resolved. But through doing that work, even I found that it's not just these individual symptoms that we need to go and quiet or medicate. It's more so a system of wholeness. Like, we need to look at the entire system. So of course, I'm not the first person to say we need to look at mind, body, and soul. And of course, that means, well, let's look at, like, how are you taking care of yourself, and how are you eating, and are you getting enough sleep, and do you have vitamin deficiencies, et cetera. So that's like really bringing, body into the work. But I really work at the intersection of the soul. And what I mean by that is, like I said, I'm paying attention to what's coming up. What are we learning? What are symptoms teaching us about ourselves? That's really, for me, I don't push this on anyone, but for me, about our own journey as souls here. And when I think of wholeness, as opposed to working with like one fragment of the person, one issue or one thing that's hurting or bothering, and certainly I'll emphasize that we do have to focus on that thing, but what about the entire story? So I think that I really feel and believe, and a lot of my writing and work is around our stories as very meaningful. And when we can take the fragments of our stories and we can put them together in a picture of wholeness, we can really start to see our own sacred path and who we are, our own purpose in the world. And even further than that, which we'll see how far we go today, but I believe that when we really are focused on the field of wholeness as opposed to the fragmented injury, we're also looking at things like multi-generational healing as part of our process. Like, what is it that our ancestors brought into our lineage that maybe still lives with us? Maybe the wound of abandonment, or always feeling alone, or specific trauma histories, etc. So my work really has gone from a place of fragmentation, where I think a lot of trauma work still is, and it is, I'm going to say it a third time, it's so important to alleviate the symptoms around very specific traumas. But to your point, we also need to come out of that place where, you use the word victim, and I want to say, I'm going to use the word victim here too, but I'm going to be really careful. I don't ever think of the word victim negatively. I actually think it's an important stage of healing. I think it's the place where we need to go. Some of us need to actually be brought into the victim stage in order to heal, because that's the place where we start to have compassion for ourselves. And so I think so much therapy these days moves people from a place of victim to survivor. Now you have the tools to be able to like survive your life. But I think when we bring in that spiritual component, when we bring in, the nervous system, when we bring in wholeness and all pieces of self and your history and where you come from and all of those components, I think that's when we move into thriving. So that's what I would share that comes up when you ask that question.
And I agree with you wholeheartedly. It really does need to be a rite of passage in a way for you to experience crisis or rock bottom or victimhood and take a look at that. And if I'm understanding what you were saying correctly, you were referencing anxiety and depression, and maybe what you were alluding to is choices that you've made in your life, or giving up better choices in your life, or you see things externally that you feel like you have no control over. And so that can become something you internalize. Am I correct?
So, and just so I understand your question, you're asking is if you are in a situation where you feel like you have no control over that situation, you internalize it. Maybe you have to ask it to me again.
But what I'm saying is that when you experience the world and you realize that maybe you didn't take the best options that you could have chosen in life and you end up with a circumstance or a situation you don't like, then that becomes the catalyst for anxiety or depression, etc. Is that what you were saying?
Sure. I mean, I don't know. I'm not thinking it as clear as that, but what I would say I do align with is that trauma is a catalyst for change. It's a catalyst for growth and transformation. It's, you know, when we go into the innermost cave, when we heal, you know, those wounds. I mean, you know this from doing hypnotherapy, right? Like when you go into the depths of those places, it opens up something in us too, like something that I often share that I believe in. And once again, don't push on anybody, but it's my own belief and I've experienced it personally and professionally, is that when we do that work, we begin to open something within ourselves too. So it's like, it's kind of like, if you think of it like on a pyramid or a spiral, it's like, okay, well, here's the, you know, we start with the trauma work, which is really important, especially if it's like causing, you know, PTSD symptoms, right? Like somebody is really suffering. So we start with the trauma work if that's where we're at. But eventually it starts to kind of open something up, right? It starts to open up a path that kind of leads us elsewhere. And for me, I really feel like access to our own intuition, access to our own sense of spirituality, whatever that is for us, I feel like really opens, like life becomes deeply sacred when we're doing that work.
I agree with you again. I have found in conversations that many people struggle with the idea of intuition. They just don't trust themselves for one reason or another. And many times you wrestle with them and other times they go, oh, that's what that is, you know? So I have never been able to pinpoint exactly what societal influence is to blame. Maybe there isn't something to blame, but there has to be a specific reason why people feel so disconnected. Could you answer that question for me?
That is a loaded question. I mean, you know, there's theories out there that we are intentionally disconnected, right? That it serves our culture, well, not our culture, it doesn't serve our culture, but that it serves the people who run our culture for us to remain disconnected. I mean, we are incredibly powerful beings. And if we had that awareness, you know, we probably wouldn't be okay with a lot of the things that are happening in our country and in the world. So I think that there is some truth to that, you know, that there's intention in how disconnected we are. When I even start to think about, I mean, because you're talking about disconnection from intuition, but I'm like, I'm going to go like this because it's like, okay, disconnection from intuition, but then let's come down the ladder to first disconnection from self, you know, and down the ladder a little more to just even start with like how disconnected we are from each other as humans, you know. The first studies of depression that existed in the United States came about when the washing machine was invented. And I find this so fascinating. I don't know if you know where this is going, but basically the women from the villages, right, that used to wash all the clothes together down at the, you know, whatever it was, the little watering hole, like, didn't have that time and space together anymore. It was the beginning of taking, you know, women and machine and starting to put them inside of houses by themselves. And so the Depression era in our country from that perspective started there. And I find that kind of fascinating. So we're really disconnected from each other. We're really disconnected from nature. We're disconnected from life. And then if you start to really, you know, evolve from there, there's a connection that comes into self. Like, okay, what does it mean to even ground into my body in this space and time and to actually really be in here right now, to be embodied? What does that even mean, right? And then I think you can talk about your connection to your intuition, right? Because how are you going to connect, mind, body, spirit, and get that information and hear that coming through and trust that if you don't start with the connection to self, really. So, yeah.
I mean, those are some powerful questions that anyone listening should be asking themselves, I think, regardless of what stage of your, let's call it spiritual development. I don't really like that term, but wherever you are in life, you should always be asking yourself those critical questions, because stagnation is the death of everything. And as you were telling, I do know that story. I call it death by laundry detergent.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Yeah. But, this is the question that I should have led with. What led you on the path of becoming a psychologist? Did you always want to do that?
Oh gosh, that's a great question. Well, as I mentioned, I have a rebellious side, and so I wasn't actually a kid who ever thought I would ever even be able to go through the schooling to get there. And so I looked for a lot of loopholes in life. I've been told for a long time since I was younger, I was always the person that people leaned on. I was always the person that people felt drawn and comfortable to come and share with or talk to, and I think that that's a really common experience probably for, your listeners, right? Like more empathic people that are paying attention to the deeper realms of life, if you will. So I was somebody who was connected in that way very early on. But my rebellious nature made it so I just never really saw myself going to school. So I looked for a lot of loopholes in life. And I remember like refusing to pick my life out of a catalog, when college came. So I actually didn't go to school right away. And then when it came time for me to go to school, I actually knew, like the funny thing, I can tell you the story. It's kind of silly, but I was like this relationship expert for people. I had never been in a serious relationship. And I was just this relationship expert for all of my friends. I had all of these answers. So I read like relationship books. It's funny, but so I read Men Are From Mars and Women Are From Venus. And I remember like getting to the end of that book and literally, and it was my intuition speaking. I wouldn't have called it then. I didn't really identify or know what it was then, but it was my intuition speaking, because what I literally heard was like, oh, like maybe I should be a therapist. Like, what would it take to become a therapist? Like this person writing this book, John Gray, right? And so I turned the last page right when I heard that. And it literally said, if you're interested in becoming a marriage and family therapist, here's what you do. So I was like, okay, all right, I'm listening, So that was the beginning of like how I actually wound up going to school and answering the call. But there are many, many other initiation stories along the way that really brought me into the work that I'm doing now. And a lot of that was intuition. It was really learning how to do therapy in a way that, most therapists are not trained. I have a nonprofit where I train therapists to, work more holistically. And it wound up just being something that really opened me up, really brought me, like we're saying, like on my own sacred journey, really made me realize that this work is not just about going to see someone. It's about, like, for me at least, it's about like what I came here to do, and not even just speaking about my job, but just any of us, right? What I came here to do on this earth is to understand who I am and how I can be in service to my community and people around me. And it is a very sacred path. So the work is very, very, very sacred to me. And I believe that I was always meant, to get here, but that's a little bit of the origin story.
You are a very genuine person. I can tell that.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
That you genuinely care about what you do as well.
Yeah.
I think that, as I learned in my own life, when you get called to doing psychology or working with anyone in any of the modalities, it's not an accident. It's almost like you're born to do it. And if you don't answer that call the first time, it keeps on calling until you pick up the phone.
Yeah.
It really does.
Yeah, I literally just had this conversation, and it's really funny because the podcast that I was on, they used a clip where literally I was saying like, yeah, if you don't answer that call, you get knocked out, and I'm like, okay, that might be a little intense, but it's true, right? And it's the hero's journey, right? So in the hero's journey, you know, the person is in the ordinary person is in the world, and you know it's going through a time period where he's really refusing that call, and the call does get louder and louder, and we see this mythic theme, you know, in Star Wars or Karate Kid, right? So he finally like answers the call, and then the mentor shows up and, you know, starts preparing him for the unknown. So it's our life is meaningful, it's purposeful. And the more that we start to pay attention to that and start to really ask the question, yeah, who am I? And like, why am I here? And what is my purpose? And the purpose is not always a vocation, right? It's not always what you're going to do for work. You know, I think that's a very patriarchal conditioning thing that we've been taught. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's not. And so I think it really is about like coming home to yourself, connecting with yourself, understanding who you are and your story. And yeah, what did you come here to do?
Yeah. Tell me about how you arrived at blending the modalities that you use. For example, in your bio, you have neuroscience and spiritual psychology, etc. How did you decide to just put all of those things together?
Yeah, well, it definitely wasn't a decision. Let's just say that. It definitely wasn't a choice. Yeah, so let's see, I started going to school to be a therapist, and it was really funny because once I started, I was like, oh shit, now I need to get a master's degree, and I'm the one kid that like didn't go to school and didn't even start, you know? So I had a lot of work ahead of me. And I went through school really quickly because I knew what I wanted and where I was going. And I wound up at a school called Pacifica, which teaches depth psychology. And depth psychology is a way of doing therapy that is much different than, you know, something like CBT. So just to give you an example, I was taught in the very beginning how to sit with clients and pay attention to, you know, symbols or even imagery that might come through to me while I'm sitting with a client, or like certain themes or patterns. And I didn't realize that wasn't normal at first. Like I didn't realize that, you know, that's not what people down the street were learning. And it took time to integrate. And then the other part of my process with schooling was I was very much thrown into the psychoactive process of my own healing and growth. So how psychology and spirituality started coming together, it created a very in-depth process for me, we'll say, and it forged in me a therapist who had truly walked through my own fires, my own underworld journeys, my own traumas. And I really, really believed deeply like what I did. Like I knew how to heal as an individual. I knew how to create profound shift and transformation in individuals. And then I became a mother. So I was already this very deepened depth psychologist, holistic healer, you know, transformative coach. Like I could create magic. I mean, it was, and I'm not creating it, I'm the facilitator of it, as you know. But I was deeply identified with the hero's journey, this process of transformation. And then what I describe as the heroine's journey, which I don't have to get into fully, was my initiation into motherhood, because motherhood brought to me an autistic child. And my child is very high functioning. I know we don't use that term anymore, but like incredibly smart, highly verbal, but still had, all of the behavioral and sensory challenges. Falls somewhere, if we wanted to label for anyone listening, under like PDA subtype, which means like the nice way to say it under labeling is like pervasive need for autonomy or drive for autonomy, which basically means like I had a kid that came here and refuses to conform. I had a child that came in and was a greater sacred rebel than I am. She like turned up the dial, right? And so raising her, she's an incredible being, but is extraordinarily challenging. And that's a lot about what my book is about. So I wound up in this place where I wanted to find all of the answers as to, why I had this child that did not fit any of the norms, why I had this child that was experiencing, sensitivities that were so extreme, why she couldn't clear toxins when she was eating certain food at a birthday party, or, just different ways that we're poisoned in this world. And I can kind of just leave it there, I guess, for now. But I was searching and seeking for the answer in this like depth psychology way. I was this holistic healer. I needed the answer to be there. And when I couldn't find it there, and I tried, I was past life journeying, anything that I could possibly heal in the energetic fields in whatever realm, anything that I could possibly do to help this child. I did within myself, because she was at first, a baby. And then I realized over time that, and this is through, the initiation of autism, I realized that I was going to have to learn differently. So I went into the world of neuroscience to understand autism, and to understand, reflex integration and neurofeedback and neurosensory integration and all of the ways that I could possibly support my daughter. And so I kind of got like a PhD. Well, maybe not quite a PhD. I'm still learning, but like I got worked and I got schooled, and I learned a lot in that realm that I never expected to venture into, to be honest. And so what's beautiful, I will say, is it all came full circle in the end. And it's not the end, but I'd say the end of the, initiation period of motherhood, where once I had followed the call to learn, the ways that science can help my child, I was then gifted. I feel like I was then brought back around to the ways in which my intuition was trying to help her. So I did get to do the ancestral lineage healing that was supportive to my child. I did get to understand the nervous system as a psycho-spiritual field and not just an organ. I did get to understand all of that, but also the necessity of being able to move in and out of a window of tolerance. And so it wound up being this journey that, forged something in me that I never expected. But that's how and why I wound up going on that path.
That was a big one. That was very interesting. And I hope that a lot of parents who are going through the same thing can find solace in your journey and reach out, talk to you, and ask you for help, whatever. This is what we need. I think that I could probably ask you to go into more stories. Yeah, I want to ask you about some of your past life stories that really shaped you. But we could go another direction too, if you want to.
Well, I don't know if I would be able to answer from a perspective of how they shaped me. I haven't done a ton of work with past lives, but what I will say is I did learn over time as a therapist, and I know it's controversial for some people, and so I respect that too. But what was happening for me in my work as a therapist, as a psychologist, was I was recognizing that, to come back to this idea of wholeness as opposed to like this one incident, right? And you've probably seen this in your work too. But I was recognizing that what was happening for some of my clients went further back, right? So for instance, I worked with a client that she had an incident at work, which was significant. So I don't want to minimize that in any way, but it's part of the story just to say, she had this incident at work where somebody had, kind of like touched her knee under a table. And I want to say that really respectfully, because this was a client who's experienced a lot of trauma. And then there were other incidents with this person at work, in a high up position. She was being sexually harassed by this person. But when it came to doing the trauma work that we did, and it was a whole case, because it was a big giant company that was trying to keep it all under wraps and was paying for her therapy. But then, we had to report the notes too on making sure that she needed to be there because she still needed it. But then she couldn't be doing that well because then it was messy. And it had a lot of bureaucracy to it. So we were in this really messy place together. I don't even know if that part matters, but the point is when we went in to do the trauma work, I remember just learning the impact of the trauma, the significance that it had on her was no different than somebody who had experienced a severe sexual assault. And it was interesting to me. And I just remember kind of tracing things back and using the body. I've learned how to do some, whether you want to call it past life work or not. I'm trained in something called LCT, life-centered therapy. And it's a way to go into the body and actually access and witness and remember the past. And so past life, lineage, history, generational, all kinds of stuff can come through there. And so it started to open doors for me when I would meet with clients like this, where it was it started to make sense that there was just something deeper. And what I can say from my own past life journey and work is whenever I've seen the wounding that's happened in other lives, as well as the gifts and also the people, it's the same. So how do I say that simply? My own interpretation of it is trauma histories that come from the past that are still working themselves out, that still have echoes or energetic patterns, right? That had the same, even a recognition in that space that there's the root, right? And even gifts, right? That come down from lineages and ancestors and abilities that we have here today, I've seen, from the past. And then people, for anyone who has done past life work, I think you will identify with this. It's, it doesn't matter what color or race or age or sex that person is. If it's the same soul, it. And so I remember that about past life work is it just was so clear that this is a continuation of that journey, at least for me.
I'm happy that you are able to speak on this topic so succinctly and share so much detail, because I find that, okay, let me go back a little bit. The reason why I do this podcast and why I speak on other podcasts and, basically try to be as controversial as possible is because I find that I get a lot of pushback from the 9-to-5 psychotherapists that don't acknowledge this kind of thing, that believe that everything that happens is between 0 to 7 and they don't acknowledge any other possibility whatsoever for the person in life. So it's essentially like telling the person you've only been alive for 7 years, when in reality that isn't true. We know, you and I know that not to be true. And what you're saying resonates with me because I stumbled onto hypnotherapy purely by accident. A friend of mine was like, "Hey, you want to do a past life regression?" And I was like, "I don't know what it is, but let's do it." You know, so we were young and we were like, "Yeah, we're going to smoke some weed. We're going to do this." So, you know, we did it. And I had an incredible breakthrough in my life. I was asthmatic my entire life. Went through this past life regression. This is at age 27, 11 years ago.
Yeah.
And it just went away. Just by no more symptoms of it whatsoever. And it's because I died in a past life in quicksand or something like that.
Wow.
Right? So people don't understand how powerful this thing can be. And also to address the somatic aspect of it, almost every day, I have to ask the question, point at where you feel it. And you'd be surprised what's linked to what. So I suppose the saying has been popularized. The body does keep the score, but the body is keeping score for games you didn't even know that you played.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And it really aligns with what I'm saying when I say, you know, from not to complicate, but from my work in, you know, what I was sharing in bridging over into the autism world and understanding it more deeply. And I don't understand it. Like, you know, I think we're just learning. I'm really calling it for myself right now. And my coaching clients, like the nervous system, a psychospiritual field, because it holds so much memory, like you're saying. And the reason that I'm speaking to that is because I've learned through my daughter what I believe, you know, if you want to call autism a frequency, let's call it that. I mean, everything is, because everything is energy and energy is everything. So we could just call it that. But what I've learned is she's come in with so much from the past, be it past life, lineage. I mean, I think that I could get really out there too, like, but she's brought so much in with her in maybe a more conscious way than people have before, that it really is about, for me, not only working with her nervous system on, you know, a neuroscience level, but also an energetic level, so that she can, so it can like inhabit her body. It's almost like her capacity needs to stretch in order to like really hold her field. I don't know if I'm saying that well enough, because it's really profound stuff that I'm just getting into. But I feel like, to your point, there's just so much in our bodies, in our energetic fields, that we are bringing with us. And that's why I'm really moving from this place in healing from this like fragmented, oh, okay, like this thing happened to you, or like, you know, you have anxiety, like, oh, okay, well, you know, maybe it's for these 3 reasons in your social emotional world, right? Into being much more interested in like all of it, right? Like your psychology, your astrology, your life path number. Like, tell me your story for an hour and I could probably tell you why you came here. You know, like and if why you came here is also going to give you information about like why you experienced the wounding that you did, right? Because your gift is in the wound. And so there's just so much that needs to be paid attention to, or that if we did pay attention to, it would blow our minds, but it would also heal us.
Controversially, it would actually get the job done in a short space of time.
Yeah.
Beings are such fascinating creatures, because I say that like I'm a monster that eats them or something, but I'm not. Because not a single one of us has come off a conveyor belt. So cookie cutter methods don't serve the individual. And until that paradigm is broken, many will continue to suffer and go unhealed on this planet for absolutely no reason. And I guess, as practitioners, we have no control over that. We can only do what we do for now. But the good news is that it's spreading. Continuing on the path that you were on, though, what are the common reasons that mothers experience burnout? And then you can also segue into the Sacred Mother Blueprint, and you can talk about advice or tips to help mothers who are struggling with neurodivergent children.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. You gave me 3 questions, which is going to challenge my executive functioning. So can you ask me one at a time?
So let's go with the first question, which is, what are the common reasons that mothers experience burnout?
Yeah. So, and I wrote about this in my forthcoming book with a working title, The Art of Chaos. I would say that our children, especially our neurodivergent children, our highly sensitive children, have come here, as we're discussing, with really big missions. I think that they've come here to change things, right? They don't conform. They don't fit in the norms, like you're saying. They're here to break those paradigms. And that does create burnout in motherhood, because it's exhausting. It's exhausting, and it's really hard to raise someone who is not fitting into normal school structures, who maybe is challenged with transition issues, and for those listening who have, children who are wired differently, you'll understand what I mean. For those not, you might not, but either way, parents still, every parent has their own challenges. But when I was speaking about something like transition issues, I can give you an example. When my child was little, and she's still kind of little, but when she was, I'd go to mama and me groups. I was trying to be normal and be part of the mom groups and do the things that you're supposed to do. And when they would leave the park, or they would leave, an event or whatever it is that we did together, they could, they might have to deal with a 3 to 5 minute tantrum if the child's upset and doesn't want to leave. But most of them would get in the car, have their little snack, and go home. I would be stuck at the park or wherever I was for the next 45 minutes, maybe an hour and a half, with a child that's raging, and to the point that she's vehemently arching her back so that you can't actually buckle her into a car seat without hurting her. And mind you, at the same time, and this is where I think, if I were to speak to burnout or the challenge that I really speak about in my writing, I was going through my own trauma response. From a nervous system perspective, of somebody screaming for that period of time can throw us into fight, flight, freeze, fawn. But also my own trauma history started coming up in my system in ways that I was oh, I've already done this work. I'm a trauma therapist. Why the hell is this here? But we heal in spirals, right? So we come back around and we visit the wound in different ways. And parenthood, for me, for sure initiates you into that. And I think that if you're parenting a neurodivergent child, my own, bias and opinion or experience, I would say, is it's even more intense. So it does bring on, not only experiences of our own systems coming online and our own bodies experiencing things from our past that's being recalled in our system when our kid is having a meltdown or refusing to conform to the norms, or, maybe you have a child that will eat 2 different things, right? And then the amount of stress that you feel trying to get your kid to eat something, and how bad of a parent you feel. Like, let's just, enter mom guilt or dad guilt with the society that we're in, telling us that we need to be able to, live like in these individual homes, right? Going back to the depression around the separation in our society. So we've gone from villages to living in these individual, lives where we're meant to, work and care for the home and care for our children and manage all the things that we do. And then we're all trying to like exercise and eat right and make sure our kids are getting the right nutrition and the right vitamins. And, the next thing that you saw on Instagram that you should be doing for your child. I mean, I could go on and on as to why you would just burn. Can I just say like the fuck out? Is that okay to say? Like,
absolutely.
I mean, it will burn you out. So it's absolutely exhausting. And there are multiple reasons as to why you would burn out. But the reason that I really bring to the table is your child is bringing up in you what you are being asked to heal. And while that isn't my own conscious parenting, message, I know Dr. Shefali is really big in that work. I'm really paying attention to not only what happened in your past, but potentially what is more, even like we've been talking about, like maybe there are other layers to what is coming up in you because of how your kid is responding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I've met a lot of parents that don't want to take accountability for their behavior, and it frustrates me. It makes me want to burn out just watching them try to figure this stuff up. But let's see if my executive function is working well. Tell me about the Sacred Mother Blueprint.
Okay, yeah, you got it. So Sacred Mother Blueprint, also kind of morphing into just Sacred Blueprint because I've worked with many individuals that are also not mothers. I want to honor that there's fathers that are on this path too, and also people who aren't parents. So from a Sacred Blueprint perspective, I have found that I am most effective at this point in the very beginning part of doing the work, and in the end. So in the beginning and in the integration. And then I do have, other supports that come in and do this one-on-one work in between. And in that blueprint phase, I meet with people and I spend, about 90 minutes and I ask a lot of questions and I follow a lot of paths so that I can understand, like we were talking about before, so I can understand who they are, what they came here for, and what, usually there's some pain point, right? So whatever this pain point is bringing up in them from a perspective of meaning, perhaps catalyst, like we've discussed, but also, and I will bring in, life path, astrology, if it's appropriate for people. I'm not an astrologer. I don't overly identify with it, but there are some key aspects to the collective that I think can be really resourceful for people. And then one of the things that I really pay attention to, and I think is really, really fascinating and helpful for people, even myself, I'm kind of impressed by it myself, is I started being able to really track nervous system imprinting. And so I've been able to really track for myself and others basically why it is we do what we do, but from a nervous system level. So becoming really, really clear, about even relationship patterns in life and how those relate to, your imprinting. And I'm trying to think of a really good example of that right now. I don't know if one's going to come to mind, but just ways in which, so I feel like one of the greatest ways for us to heal right now is to increase our capacity in our nervous systems. And so if we look at the world and how split it is, right, it's kind of, I don't know how you feel about this, but it's kind of mind blowing to me in some ways that if we were able just to create the capacity in our systems to hold space for each other's differences, like the entire world would change. So we could just start there. But coming back to like a nervous system imprinting perspective, you might be able to see why you're not able to do that. If you can go back and see, you know, if I can support and go back and see history and like how this has set itself up from the beginning, how you've been in a position for a very long time where like this is how much your capacity is. This is your threshold. Once you hit your threshold, what do? Do you fight? Do you flight? Do you freeze? Do you fawn? You know, do you wind up people pleasing? Do you wind up like what is it that your system is designed to do? And then we can work on changing that. But the blueprint is really to lay it all out, everything that I possibly can. And it's at this point, it's very, very customized, if you will, right? It's tailored to the individual. So it really is paying attention to what their current pain points are and questions. But yeah, I would call it a soul map in ways.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. It sounds pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, final question. Let's talk about what we talked about off of the recording, which would be estrangement. I don't know why that came up, but let's go for it.
Let's just trust that it's in the field, right? Excuse me. Yeah. So if I were to speak about estrangement, for me, it would come back to what we're talking about, which is it's really around this capacity to hold within our nervous system. So when, you know, I have so many clients over the years that I've worked with who are, well, I mean, I'm glad to say, actually, I've really seen some of them come through estrangement, but the common, you know, medicine, if you will, that's given through therapy when it comes to estrangement or, you know, well, I mean, it depends. It depends on your specific situation. So I want to be really careful here, but most often what you will hear from a therapist is you need to draw boundaries, right? And some of them even encourage that you create that distance. And for me, I'm not saying that that's, you know, wrong, especially if that's what feels right for you. But I am saying that what if there was a way for you to increase your capacity, for you to work at the level of your nervous system so that you could hold more, you know, whether that's your own triggers and activation around this person, or potentially it's their triggers and activation. But what if you were able to be in your own self energy and you were able to stay so rooted there, right? Coming back to connected to yourself, that you have the boundaries that you need to have. And if certain things have happened in your family, of course, there are horrible traumas that happen in families. And sometimes that's the best boundary for you. And that's totally appropriate, right? But if the reason that you're estranged and not engaging in that relationship is because you've emotionally cut off from it and haven't actually done the work to close it for yourself, that's going to come back because it's not actually healed. And then if the reason that you're estranged is because you don't have the capacity in your nervous system to hold space for potentially another perspective or whatever it is that might come up in that space, then there might be another way. There might be another way for you to be okay enough to be in connection if that's appropriate for your situation.
It's all about what actually is appropriate for your situation. And I don't know if you would agree with this, but since the boundaries theories have been prevalent in society and everybody knows about it through social media, it has become a gateway to cutoff culture, which is worse than anything else because you still have to do the work. And whatever you're avoiding, as you were saying, it's going to come back through somebody else. It's not like there aren't narcissists and psychopaths out there. In fact, I would argue that there are more in this time than ever before. And it's been created by not dealing with your shit. The less people that deal with their shit, the more of that we will get. And common advice that I have given, not that I like advice given, because sometimes that can be worse than anything else, but what I've said to people is that you only get one mother or father if that's who you're estranged from. And there are powerful lessons to be learned by doing the full spectrum of internal work.
Oh, you just went out.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now.
That is wild. I forgot what I'm saying. And that's a new thing that just happened today. Okay, must be saying something that they don't want me to talk about. But
you're saying you only get one mother or father.
You only get one mother or father. I apologize for that flub. And it's up to you to do the full spectrum of internal work, because there's so much power in getting along with someone that doesn't want you to get along with them. Sometimes it's actually the other person. And sometimes you have to learn how to bridge that gap between you and them, reach out and touch them. And I found that people don't ever really just see it as simplistically as that. You only get one. What happens when that person dies and you haven't healed yourself? Will there be remorse and regret and guilt and all this other stuff that you have to deal with? Or would you rather that person close their eyes for the last time and you know that you did everything that you could? Because you often hear these estrangement stories where this person didn't talk to that person for 20, 30, 40 years and so forth. And then they feel badly about it. Why? You could have just been the bigger person, right? It's not that simple, but that's the theory, right?
Well, and I think I think you have to be careful when, because there are so many people that are estranged due to like really specific trauma histories, and so it's like
the really specific and much darker stuff. You have to be careful and make that distinction as well. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I do understand why some people choose that and how it's the best for some. But I think maybe even if we moved a little bit away from, even estrangement, like family estrangement, just cut off culture, I can appreciate that. Right. I think it's become so easy for people just to, right. It's like, oh, that didn't feel good for me. And so now I'm going to draw a boundary and, not speak with you anymore. And that's heartbreaking. That's in my own personal life. I think that's just heartbreaking. It's like, what if you could increase your capacity for discomfort, right? What if we could get our bodies to a place where we could hold difficult conversations? It's funny because, I did through my men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's funny because I went into the field thinking, I'm going to be a couples counselor. And I haven't done the work a ton, which is funny. If any of my couples listen, they're like, what? But the funny thing is I'm actually a very good couples therapist. And it's because I learned couples therapy. And then I was like, I don't really think that any of us really know what we're doing. And so I stopped doing couples therapy. And then I went through hell in my own relationship. And then I came back after working with 4 different therapists over a period of years where I learned so much from them. I learned what to do and I learned what not to do. And then I had many tools and resources to actually be really, really supportive as a couples therapist. And I don't work with couples a lot now, so don't seek me out. I'm just kidding. But the ones that I do work with, and I am open for the right fit, but the ones I do work with are like what I'm bringing to them more than anything is this nervous system work, right? Because it's like, well, what if you had the capacity to hold within your body space when your partner is sharing something that makes you uncomfortable? And it's really that simple. It's like, what if we could have more, I mean, I don't really care to do this, but people that want to sit around the table and talk about politics. What if you guys could hold space for each other's opinions within your own physical body and nervous system? Like, so I do align with, like really being mindful about estrangement, because sometimes it really is what is best for certain people. But if it really comes down to like, I just don't want to have that awkward conversation, or, I just don't want to be uncomfortable, or, oh, that makes me feel so nervous, I'm just going to run over here and not deal with it. I mean, that's where I feel like it's like, okay, it's time for us to like work with our shit,
Well, how can we ever fix something if we can't talk about it? That goes
Right.
for everyone. Everybody listening, ask yourself that question. Ask it to other people, because it's the only thing that makes sense at this point. If we don't want any further division and we don't want discomfort, then why can't we talk about it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, folks. Dr. Nicole Dolan is very intuitive, very genuine, very intelligent, and expresses complex ideas very simply in a way that we can understand. I highly suggest visiting her website and making contact at drnicoledolan.com or sacredpathholistictherapy.com. And if there's anything else you would like to add, do so now.
Yeah, I just want to say thanks for having me today. And it was enjoyable to speak with you, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks for being on the Boundless Authenticity podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
You're listening to the Boundless Authenticity podcast, where we discuss everything related to the evolution of human consciousness.
At the very least, people need to understand that the United States builds bunkers, which are basically cities underground, every 3 months.
Basically, when you dream, you tap into your subconscious. It is your nocturnal intuition, your creativity and imagination unchained from conscious reason, ego and logic.
They're biologically alive, but they have no soul. They have AI consciousness. They can alter your conscious of the brain to get the brain.
We live in a multidimensional reality. Whether it comes through esoteric information in the spiritual realms, or the UFO people, experiencers, or mainstream through quantum physics and through mainstream science now realizing that parallel dimensions probably exist.
We're all spiritual beings. We're all having these human experiences. We've heard that phrase over and over and over. But what does that really mean?
All the big questions of life, we have these answers inside of our soul.
We're ultimately studying the nature of what it is to be human, good and evil, our psychology, how we think, and our health. That's why I love Bruce Lee's great quote, all knowledge is ultimately self-knowledge.
The Boundless Authenticity podcast.